They've outgrown my house.
Right. I figured you guys got mine and picked it up. You guys.
Do they have big appetites?
No, they're getting there, yeah, we're seeing that.
It was teenage
Yeah.
and it was always so interesting. He wanted to eat everything that was around. He could be at a restaurant and younger, so they wanted to well, and quite carelessly, the waitress just said, "Are you doing that?" The younger was like, "Yes, it's a smoke."
Yeah, right, it has to be, it's like a Uber, right? Yeah, we're not quite there.
So
Kid pickiness, none of the, yeah. I'm very curious.
I remember complaining to one of the boys one
Yes, I think that is changed. What do you do? Yeah, that's not, I felt like feeling bad about that.
well, this is what you have to do.
Well, and like, I'm sure I hear words that like,
Which but you see these kids.
Let me see what you. I actually bet the channel.
I mean, during the
And I'll leave you.
their dad was like,
It starts at 6. It's over.
yeah, I don't know.
You know, it's open.
It's
They run out of
interesting, they came, my best friend was at Thanksgiving, to see my mom, and she listens about that.
She was talking yesterday.
And, they're developing. Yeah, because
These kids are results. They like that. Get up and down.
older son is
So fancy. And the service is pretty high. But the people are all late. You'll have gray hair all over that.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I believe that.
Kid, you still grew up.
It was pretty well that. We went to lunch with the gang. And cat.
So no, look, I couldn't get the file open.
Her little sister. We have two of them. Yeah, we adopted a sweet
Alright.
mother of a friend of ours. Well, met them, I don't remember Eric.
I used to transfer
Eric's mother got
over for the money. It wasn't working. Lovely. That, yeah, you should just send it.
Living, you can't take it off.
Okay. Alright. We'll get started. I'm sorry, we're having some technical difficulties and we can't project the presentation on the screen here in the Guild Room. But luckily, for those at home, they can see it on Zoom. Oh, nobody there yet. Okay, so anyway, well, good morning and welcome to the 2023 Budget Forum in the Guild Room. And this is just, it's so exciting to be here in this wonderful space. And I thank all of you for showing up this morning. We're really really happy to be here. And I'm Betsey Monsell. I'm treasurer for those who don't know me. And Erin Sacco Pineda is our director of finance. And we're going to spend a little bit of time with you this morning and talk through the budget for the church, the church's ministry for the coming year. So, to start off, we have a lovely picture of the cathedral and the new 525 Olive building in the background. It's like, yay, a 20-year project has come to completion, and it's beautiful. Let's see. All right. To start off our presentation, we talk about where does the money come from? And our budget this year is about almost $1.9 million. And half of that comes from your pledges. So about $927,000 comes from pledges. That's the most important source of our income for the year. Now, I will say that that pledge income has been pretty flat for about the last 12 years that I know of. And so as inflation hits and our campus expands and our expenses go up, our pledge income represents a smaller and smaller portion of the total needed to run the total facility. So we are very blessed because we have other sources of income. If we didn't, we'd have a much smaller budget. So the rest of the money from that will fund our ministries for 2023 comes primarily from investment income. The cathedral has enduring gifts funds. The cathedral has enduring gifts funds, which are investments for the long term to support the ministries of the church. And that represents about 7% of our income. In addition to that, the Nutmeg and Olive LLC, which is a subsidiary of the cathedral and owns this part of the building that we're in, and also has some long-term investments for the benefit of the cathedral. That income from the LLC represents 14% of our income. And then we have money from other things. People give money every year for special uses like Friends of Cathedral Music. Those special funds represent 4% of our income. Our facility use, we're able to rent out parts of our building and the cathedral for various groups around town. That represents 4% of our income. We also, when you attend worship services on Sunday and during the week, when we pass the plate, we have plate giving and other offerings. That represents 9% of our income. And when we looked at our total budget for this year, the expense budget, which we'll talk about in a minute, when we added up all our sources of income, it wasn't quite enough to fund the budget for next year. We have additional expenses due to inflation this year and costs of operating the new building. So chapter authorized a special extra draw from the Cathedral Fund, which is our long-term investment, of $200,000 to balance the budget this year. So that is it for cathedral income. And where does the money go? Well, about 2/3 of it, 67% of it goes to pay salaries for our staff. And the total budget this year is almost $1.9 million in expenses, and that is split among all the various departments of the church. Some of the larger ones are worship and liturgy, is about 11% of the budget. Music and the arts is 15%. Buildings and grounds pay for utilities and keeping the lights on is about 16%. And all of the other things that we do, Christian formation, outreach and mission, congregational life, hospitality and fellowship, and administration and governance, and the common life share, which is the draw that we pay, annual share that we pay to the diocese, is about that's $175,000 this coming year. So, our expenses have gone up this year. We are giving the staff a 7% cost of living adjustment this year. That was recommended by the bishop. Inflation was quite high in 2022, and we want to make sure that our staff are appropriately compensated. They all do a wonderful job, and we want to pay them appropriately and keep them around. So that raises our expenses by a little over $90,000. And then we have new expenses, primarily for the new building, and contracted services for trash removal, utilities, telecommunications for this building, supplies, and inflation on everything else that all of our normal expenses. That is almost $50,000. And we've been able to reduce some expenses in a few other areas. So in total, our expense budget has increased $126,000 this year. And we knew that was going to be a tough stretch. So that's why we needed to tap some of the long-term investments. All right, so Erin is going to come up and talk a little bit about each department of the church. And I've got this set up so you can see the presentation and they can see it on Zoom.
It's not a desk.
Oh, it's not.
It's on Zoom.
All I was seeing was the first page.
Oh, yeah. It's here.
Okay.
Okay, here's Erin.
Hi guys.
Good morning.
So we have our IT difficulties. We also have the difficulty that, when you're going to do a presentation, you sort of spend the 24 hours prior to it visualizing yourself up there and whatever. But just like in November when I went to St. Bartholomew's to do a presentation, and I imagined myself doing it in their parish hall that was demolished in 2021, and I got there and went, wait, where am I speaking? I don't recall. I don't know what I'm going to do. I had that same feeling today. I was driving here going, I wonder which room I'm going to be in. I can't. It's not all things new, right? All things new this last year for us. So it is a little bit weird also here in the room for us, and it's also a little weird for us to not have the screen up. In my notes, I don't tend to write down these amounts. So I will try to kind of give you guys some information about the amounts we're talking about as we go through each department. So the first department we're going to talk about is the worship and liturgy department. And for each department, we have allocated the compensation of the staff that help support that department or lead that department, as well as some of the direct costs that we have in the budget that are non-personnel type costs. And so I'm going to give you some color on those costs for each of the departments. In the worship and liturgy area, obviously our clergy are the ones that we account for their compensation, or at least a portion of their compensation in the worship and liturgy department. As most of you are certainly aware, our 3 full-time clergy are all very busy and spread among many departments, and so we do actually allocate for narrative purposes the compensation between those departments. In regard to clergy compensation, I'd also just remind you guys that we, in the Episcopal Church, when we have clergy, we do pay an 18% clergy pension assessment. So that is part of the compensation costs for the clergy, as well as all of our clergy are participating in the Episcopal Medical Trust. We have, I think it's 9 or 10 staff who are eligible for participating in the medical trust, which is how we provide health insurance to our staff. Now, what's interesting is that in this coming year is that the diocese has begun a process of increasing the diocesan minimums for what the church pays for versus what the staff person pays for, what the employee pays for. And the Cathedral has for the last several years made an effort to lead the charge and do better than the diocesan minimum. We are still doing that, but that we're sort of narrowing that piece as we continue to have these budget challenges. So so just to be aware of that. The diocese is on a 3-year kind of plan to start to encourage churches to pay more for spousal and family coverage than we have been able to do in the past. So that's a little bit of a like, put that on the shelf for a year from now, as that may be a bigger factor in our budget in the next couple of years. In regard to the non-personnel direct costs of worship and liturgy, we budget for about $36,000 of direct costs for this department that are not personnel related. A big portion of that is copying and printing costs, and I know many of you remember over the years we've been trying to figure out ways to reduce that. With the move into the new billing, logistically it made sense for us to go back to 2 copiers, which during COVID we were able to reduce down to just 1 copier. So we're back to 2 copiers, but Kathleen did a big fancy expensive copiers. But Kathleen also negotiated with our copy contract new printers for every office and maintenance on those printers. So there is efficiencies to be gained when you sort of align all your technology and have everyone working on the same platforms, on the same kinds of things, and make sure you have that professional support for when things do go wrong with your technology. So that's a move that's been made this year. The other things that are in liturgy and worship are flowers expense, all of our wonderful Christmas decorations, communion, wafers, wine, candles, all of those worship supplies. And then we also account for things like our dancers at Palm Sunday and, costs of the blessings of the animals, if we have some costs for that, things like that. Whenever we have our we do things and we go around and take over the streets, when the police get their little bit from us to protect us while we're in the street, and those kinds of things are in this department. The next department I'm going to talk about is music and the arts, and that has been a very busy department in this last year. Martin, fortunately, continues to lead our music department with Gabriel's support as the sub-organist. And in the fall this year, we were able to add Nicholas. Nicholas came back to us. Some of you will remember him from years past. And he is not being paid out of the operating budget, just to be clear. Nicholas is on a 1-year contract to help launch the concert series and relaunch the chorister program post-COVID. And so that is being paid for out of a bequest, actually, that chapter has approved the use for that. And the bequest was specifically restricted to music. So this was a nice way to use those resources for parish development in the music department specifically. We also made a big move this year. That's something that I think a lot of you will agree is something we've needed to do for a long time. For a long time, our paid section leaders have been paid very under market. At least when I started in the position I'm in here, it's been 10 years, guys. Whoa. Okay, so that became clear to me that we were paying under market, or at least I was advised of that, and in my experience with other churches, I see that that's true. So we have moved the section leader pay from $18 an hour to $30 an hour starting December 1st of 2022. And obviously we want to do right by our section leaders, but also our music department has been impacted, just like a lot of organizations, with this labor shortage, and you've got to do something to attract folks, and being at market market wages is important. So the section leaders are finally, let's call it finally, at market wages. So that's a really good thing. That did add, I want to say, maybe $23,000 to the budget. So there's the reason why we hadn't been able to make that move before. The direct costs of the music department are about $16,000, so you can see that our music costs are primarily in personnel. The direct costs are for instrumentalists for special services, like Easter and Christmas and Holy Week services, and then things like organ maintenance and supplies for the choristers and things like that. The music department is also supported quite a bit by our other funds, our special funds and our endowment funds. So our enduring funds include will include the Pacham Fund, which is, Pacham is the Pacific Academy of Ecclesiastical Music, which was a subsidiary corporation of the Cathedral for many years, and an organization that put on special music programming, and that group, that nonprofit, closed, and their resources were turned over to the Cathedral as an endowment. So that endowment is specifically for special music expenses, not the operating budget, but they did allow for room for for instrument maintenance of the organ, so for maintaining the organ. The other endowment is a music endowment specifically to support music compensation, and that's been growing over the last few years. That was just started a few years ago, and so both of those funds accumulate investment earnings, and then we take a draw from those funds on an annual basis to support the payment of expenses for the music department. Friends of Cathedral Music, as you all know, is a strong program with the Cathedral as well, and we also do take a portion of Friends of Cathedral Music to support music compensation. That's something we've needed to do over the last few years to help balance the budget, and it has helped to allow us to maintain the staffing at the level that we are doing, not only because we want the ability to grow our program and maintain it at the high caliber it is, but as well as especially as we relaunch the chorister program, it's important that we comply with having 2 adults, wherever we have children on site doing music stuff. So that's part of the reason for having the music staffing the way we do. The next department is Christian Formation, and Christian Formation includes children, youth, family events, as well as adult formation, so forums, like we're doing right now. Maya is still our CYF director, and Maya is working 25 hours a week with us and doing an amazing job leading the children and youth department. I know that in recent years, everything blends together now because of the COVID shutdown, but in recent years, we all were able to see the great work with the playground in the sanctuary. She also is very engaged with the diocesan youth events and makes sure that our youth are integrated and taking those opportunities, including some activities at the Good News Festival. Penny?
She's nationally known. She's in Virginia this week to speak at a national conference about the program because she's acknowledged as a national expert.
Yes. Yeah, so for everybody online, and so what Dean Penny just shared is that Maya is nationally known specifically for launching the Playground program and is in Virginia this weekend speaking at a conference about that. So that's so cool. Also, you guys, I'm sure you all know Maya. She's amazing. She's just an amazing person to be near, to be engaged with. And I know as we've been going through all of this sort of turmoil of moving into the new building, she's been a great support in any way she could be a support this past year. And so I just want to take an opportunity to have gratitude for her. Maya has let me know we are going to do Camp Spirit, our Vacation Bible School, again this year. What form it will exactly take, again, relaunching children's programs after the COVID shutdown. We don't know for sure yet, but is her intention to do that. We don't budget for Camp Spirit. We try to have the fees essentially cover the costs. So we charge a minimal fee to the folks who take it on. The adult formation is led by Stacy Klahman, who was here, and I don't see her. I wish she could wave. Anyway, so Stacy is a volunteer leading the adult formation, scheduling forums, working closely with Penny to make sure that we continue to grow and continue the high level of adult formation that we're known for. And to be perfectly honest, probably one of the main reasons I started coming to the Cathedral, my ex-husband used to laugh because we would be in the old guild room right after 8 o'clock services, and I was on the edge of my seat, just soaking in all of the theological education that was new for me and really at a high caliber that made me really excited. So it's just a great way for us to continue to attract new folks. The direct costs of formation are pretty minor, actually. We only budget for $7,900 of direct costs. Maya is able to do her children and youth events at pretty minimal costs. A youth event, getting some pizza or whatever is, the primary cost of it. And then in terms of adult formation, we do pay speaker honoraria, when we have folks come and do that for us. So that's the main elements of the costs. Okay, so the next department we're going to talk about is outreach and mission. And outreach is always a funny part of our budget conversation because the budget just isn't going to be able to represent our commitment to outreach. As we know, outreach is something that is very close to the heart of the Cathedral community and also requires not just treasure, but the time and the talent of all of us who are committed to that missionally. So we do not pick up or try to account for the value of all of your time that you spend on our outreach activities, and we also do not try to pick up in the budget a lot of the donated items that I know happen, especially for things like showers of blessings. So that's a common question is, why doesn't our budget have more for outreach? And the reason is that the outreach community raised that up themselves and seem to not need us to. We just don't get the check requests, guys. We would pay them if you guys submitted them, but we just don't seem to have actual expenses that come in and say, hey, we need this. We divide in the operating budget the outreach activities between Cathedral-sponsored activities. So those would include things we do on site, like showers of blessings, and then grants to other organizations. So the outreach committee is involved in a lot of partnering with other organizations here locally, as well as in figuring out what we can provide in terms of financial resources to those organizations to support, as another element of support for what they're doing. Outreach is also another area that we're able to support with endowment funds. Many of our oldest endowment funds were restricted for the language of the day was for the sick and destitute. So we have decided that means outreach, and that's what we're using it for. And so we have, again, a draw each year out of those enduring funds based on our investment policies, and we transfer those funds into a special fund so that they are tracked in conformance with the purposes that they are needed for. We do use those funds then as part of the operating budget as well to help us cover the expenses. And I don't know if I said it, but in the 2023 budget, we have direct costs of $12,000 planned, which includes grants to other organizations as well as our own activities. And I probably should say that Jen is still the chair of the outreach committee. Jen Zhao. Jen is still the chair of the outreach committee. Congregational life is the next department I'm going to talk about, and congregational life is our catch-all terminology for a lot of different things. So our Richard Hogue has to wear lots of hats. He's over here now, wearing one of them. And so in the congregational life department, we kind of have a lot of sub-departments. So we have a section that has some budget for a kind of evangelical type, going out in the community and inviting others, and showing our welcoming spirit. So Ashes to Go, any expenses incurred for that. For example, Pride Parade, those things are part of this department. The other things, we have a section for communications, and so publicity, website, audio-visual, all of those kinds of things. We invest a fair bit in technology and software as well to keep all of our members engaged. So we do pay subscription fees for Realm and for our online calendaring software and all of those things. So again, those all kind of fall in this area. And then finally, the major subcategory would be for stewardship, legacy, the legacy event and the annual campaign. I think that the community is very aware that Susan Jester has been leading the charge on some of our evangelical and connecting of folks and of new members work in the last year or two, year and a half or so, and that Susan's position is being funded by donors, by special donations right now, and has not yet been incorporated in the operating budget. So be aware of that we continue that by the grace of the generosity of those folks who see it continue, and we're happy that we're able to do that. Wayne, continues to be our communications coordinator, works 28 hours a week, and is focused on, as that position has sort of shifted over time as we've moved into this new COVID and now, hybrid meetings and all of that stuff, that a lot more of electronic communications that we had before. The direct costs, so the non-compensation costs of congregational life, are about $38,900 is what we have. And again, a lot of that is for software, it's for connecting members, it's for our evangelical type, going out and showing, and I don't know, I guess I think of it as is showing the world Jesus' love that we try to practice with each other in our community. So that's kind of how I use that language. Okay, the next area is hospitality and fellowship. And this is where we get into Kathleen's areas. So Kathleen and her staff, let's think about Kathleen in her administrative role, operations management role. We have 3 departments that we split Kathleen, the sextons, and the sextons in. We actually allocate Kathleen's time, Judy's time, and accounting kind of across all departments because we're trying to support everybody and all of the activities. But the sextons we do divide between buildings and grounds and hospitality and fellowship. Because it's an interesting thing. I know when I came and started being active in the church, I thought sexton meant security and janitorial, essentially. And what I realize now is that the work of our sextons is customer service, it's outreach, it's being the face of the church, it's it's scheduling, it's planning events, it's trying to make all of us happy, it's all the things. So that's why we feel really, to emphasize that so much of their time is to set up, take down events, and be engaged with the community, in addition to trying to keep our facility looking clean and neat and tidy. We also all know that Bobo is off into his new. He's out there with with his saw now. Does anyone know?
They're great for that.
Yeah, no, but maybe he's got his trailer up there at Camp Stevens by now. We'll be glad to see. But so Bob has moved on, and Jen Zhao has moved into a staff position as facilities manager. The other thing we changed in this budget, because many of you know we've had some turnover in the Sexton area and the facilities area in the last 6 months or so, to prepare for Bob's departure, as well as, you know, trying with new people. Sometimes it doesn't work out. So we moved in the operating budget this year to 3 28-hour-a-week sexton positions versus 2 full-time sexton positions. And so the thinking there is that we can spread and have more of kind of dual, you know, overlapping schedules. We are focused on things like human resources compliance, right? Making sure our sextons have a time that they can take a lunch, right? Those kinds of things. We want to make sure that when we have the need to have setup, that we can do that, you know, and have more of the workers on site. And sometimes, and maybe more and more of the time, given that we have a bigger campus and a lot more spaces that are being used, we will need more than one sexton on duty at a time. So we'll see how that continues to change as we live into these new digs, these new facilities. So we have Lucky, who has been filling in as our third sexton for a while, but we may be looking for a third paid sexton at some point. We've accounted for that in the budget. In the hospitality and fellowship area, the direct expenses are about just under $20,000. Primarily that is food. So just to be clear, it's coffee hour, it's events like Cathedral Day, annual meeting, St. George's, sort of all of those things. We also pick up things like we'll have laundry and incidental expenses, you know, replenishing hospitality goods, things for the kitchen, etc. in that area. But to be frank, it's mostly us chowing down together. The next section is buildings and grounds, and this is, sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. So this is the big area that changed because of us moving into the new building. So I know that what I can share is that the buildings and grounds expenses in the 2023 budget as compared to 2022 have increased 30%. And really, if you think about how much square footage we have taken on, that's not surprising at all. The areas that have increased are security and access. So not only have we renegotiated our security contracts with our patrol personnel to include around the new building, parking lot, or the parking garage, etc. We also have all of this new technology that does or does not allow us into the second floor. We're in this building when we want to be, and so that's has an added cost. We also have now 3 elevators to maintain, and so that increases our elevator maintenance contract threefold. So just to be, you know, that's a really easy thing to look at. Janitorial services, we have 5 new bathrooms to maintain, you know, that kind of thing. And then utilities. Utilities are a big one. Is it 6, Penny? All right. I always heard Kathleen say 5. So. Utilities are a piece that these last couple of years during the COVID shutdown, we've really struggled with trying to kind of like project what our utility costs are going to be. A couple of things had happened over the years, right? When the administrative building that was here went down, you know, was being demolished, everyone moved into the basement offices. Then we had HVAC installed down there that we hadn't had before, so what was that going to cost in comparison to the savings, et cetera. And then the COVID shutdown, how much is the facility really being used? We're in the hopefully final phase of that kind of, we're not quite sure what a full year's worth of utility costs in the new building will be. I will share, just because I like to overshare, I guess. The first bill we got for SDG&E in the new building was, yeah, heart-stopping. It was a little bit scary. It was for multiple months as the transition was taking place, but it costs. And so obviously in the Great Hall building, we have a lot less costs for utility than we did when we were all in there using the resources, but it looks like it's going to be about the same to do the energy in the new areas as it is for the gas and electric in the old areas. So that's significant, I think, if you think of how much more space we have in the new buildings. We are seeing what we would, it looks to me like we're seeing what we would like to think we're seeing, which is more energy efficiency in the new spaces, but it's still that much more cost. We're also obviously in the offices trying to figure out how to not be too hot or too cold in every spaces. I do have a blanket in my room.
Solar energy?
What was that?
Are you considering solar energy in the future?
In the future, yes, absolutely. I know that there was a committee who was working on solar ideas in the last year or two. The solar, there has been a task force or, a joint venture, if we want to put it that way, that the diocese has been engaged in with an organization that was proposing solar and how it would work at each of the churches. I'm going to look at Penny and go out on a limb and say, I believe as a community we've decided not to pursue solar with the organization that the diocese is working with at this point, and with everything else sort of shifting and changing, and potentially a major gift campaign being launched here.
I can add to that,
Yeah.
Since I arrived, I've been asked at regular intervals, when are we going to do solar? Why aren't we doing solar? And my answer has been, at present, the technology of the solar is such that it would break our red tile roof. So that it's not compatible with our roof at the moment. But I always said, and I'm seeing it now coming out in some news reports, that the time is coming when you can just roll out a flexible mat of solar cells, and that might be more usable for us.
So what Penny just shared is that she has been asked ever since she arrived at the cathedral at various intervals, when are we going to do solar? And the answer in part has been affected by that. The solar options as they have been historically would break our red tile roof. And so that if we did it at all, it would limit it to other parts of the roofing area and limit what we could do. So seems to be some flexible solar cell technology coming out, and so it is a priority when we get to where it is the right thing for the cathedral and our facilities. Absolutely. Okay, the last department I'm going to talk about is, because I'm probably way over, I have no idea, is administration and governance. Administration and governance is where we account for essentially whatever things that we can't plug into another department, because they just cover and support everything, and everything in our operation. The folks who work in administration and governance are Kathleen, who leads our department, myself, and Judy, our registrar and receptionist, as well as many of you know that Molly Green resigned as bookkeeper in May, and so we've been doing temporary holding down the fort in the accounting department this past year, and we have hired Wes Dayoff, who is our new bookkeeper. He is working a 25-hour-a-week schedule, so just be aware of that, but he has been hired with the intention of doing a fair bit of his time in office. And so we're responding to what we think everyone knows is, especially as we move from everybody at home back into our in-person worship and day-to-day activities, to have that support both for staff and the community in the office is important. So far, I love him. he's great. So he's going to be a great addition to the team. Yes.
I'm really puzzled why the roof has to be broken for the panel. The panel could be anywhere. It could be off the roof, but the generated electricity then could go into some other access.
Right, so the question that's being asked is about what we said about the limitations on solar and how it would impact the roof is how I'm hearing the question. And what I would encourage you to do is talk to Penny about what she understands. Or maybe Richard has a comment.
Bottom line, putting them in breaks all the tiles, which creates roofing problems, which would be far more expensive than it's worth to get them in the first place in their current iteration of the technology.
I'm just saying that having experience with this on our house, we also were faced with the idea of breaking into the roof in some way, but we've avoided that in all places.
It's something that we've looked into and researched extensively, and that's what our architects and other folks have told us about it here. So we've been looking at different ways of doing it, but that's where the technology is today.
Right.
Here for our historical stuff.
Do architects know about solar?
Yeah, so I'm going to just say that's not really, it's not going to be part of the budget even when and if we do, it does happen in a direct way. So I would ask that we take the solar conversation offline.
I just did a study on it.
It'll be
It's feasible for all buildings in the city.
It'll be a capital project, not a budgeted project. Yeah.
Right, so this forum is about budget, yeah, so, and I am not the one who should be up in front of you speaking to the issue of solar. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on, and then I know, this is not new, that many folks are interested in us pursuing that project, and Penny and Richard and Justin, and then, you know, Kathleen, there are other people who can tell you who are the right folks to go to get the answers that you're looking for. So the one thing I want to share about administration and governance about the direct costs is it's $145,000 in direct costs in administration and governance. Those can be broken into actually just a handful of areas. We account for all of our telephone and internet costs in just under administration. We also account for all of our IT support and and computer equipment, that sort of thing in that arena. Our property liability insurance alone is about $45,000 a year, so that is a big component of that. And we have an annual audit by an independent CPA firm, and that's about $15,000 a year. So that you can see that we can kind of chunk that, and you can see pretty clearly how those things. Of course, those costs do also support all of the various departments, but it's more. Some of those are more difficult to allocate, and so we don't do that. The last line item or last expense department in the budget is what I refer to as Episcopal Church obligations or diocesan expectations, or however you might want to think of it. The bulk of that is our common life share, which is our mission assessment to the diocese. I think most of you know that the way that is calculated is based on net operating revenue as reported on our annual parochial report. So it's sort of a lagged calculation. Here in the next 30 days, I will do our 2022 parochial report calculation, and the 2022 calculation will allow us to know what our 2024 common life share is. Does that make sense? Right, so it's kind of a pushed out. So the common life share for 2023 is $175,000, and that is up just 0.8% from the prior year. The weird thing about the parochial report is while we focus on the revenue side in terms of these calculations and the impact of the numbers, the way that the parochial report figures are drawn is actually based on what our operating expenses were. And the reason I want to mention that is because the common life share amounts that some churches across the diocese and probably nationally have been like swinging because expenses have been drastically impacted during the COVID shutdown, right? Like utilities went way down, some people laid off staff, or some churches had to lay off staff, etc. We didn't have to lay off any staff during the COVID shutdown, other than we did since we had closed the nursery and decided not to, at least now, and open it with paid staff. Those are the only staff people that we have not continued and or rehired. The other thing I want to share about the Cathedral community is we didn't experience much turnover. So most everywhere else has been experiencing this, where as things have shifted, people have chosen not to stay at their pre-COVID organizations, and there's been a great deal of just flux, you know. And in the churches, I have seen that in other churches I work for. The hires and termination paperwork and final paychecks to cut and et cetera have ramped up quite significantly in the last year or two, 2021 and 2022, but not here so much, you know. So the turnover that we have had has been planned and expected, including obviously Jeff Martinhawk's move to the diocese, which allowed us to bring Richard, yay, and then with Bob's departure, Bob's retirement, you know, we've had some fluctuations in buildings and grounds, but that's to be expected as we create a new normal, you know, fill some big shoes. So anyway, that to me is an explanation as to why we're seeing just real consistency in the dollar value of our common life share from year to year. That was a lot. And if you had the thing on the screen, you would see essentially a preview of the 2023 operating budget summary compared to 2022, so that you will also have available to you in the annual meeting packet next week. Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Received government funding during COVID for staff.
We did. So we elected not to apply for PPP money, so the Paychecks, what does that stand for? Paychecks Protection Program. So that was the first wave of the money that folks were getting. We could have qualified for that. We elected not to, feeling at the time that we didn't need it. And then if in 2021, the Paychecks Protection Program was extended and people could apply either for the first time or for a second PPP loan, we still elected not to do that. However, the other thing that changed in the beginning of 2021 is they expanded what were called the Employee Retention Credit Program that was part of the COVID federal granting, program. And what that did is it provided refunds on payroll taxes that we had paid, and the refund amounts were actually in excess of what we had paid. So in total, yeah, but I mean, it was even more than what actually had been paid for those periods. Anyway, so what did we get? $130,000, I want to say, that has been received. Yeah.
And that was just given, wasn't a loan.
That was not a loan, correct.
And the other would have been.
Well, it would have been, but as long as, with the PPP program, as long as you could prove that you used it for eligible expenses, it was forgiven, so it was essentially a grant. And from what I saw, most people were able to justify that. Yeah, but we elected not to get PPP loan, but we did take advantage of the Employee Retention Credit Program.
If we have extra money come in, where will that go?
It depends on type. So what do you, can you give me an example?
So we get extra money through pledging and extra plate money. Where would that, I mean, I would say that's general fund.
Yeah, exactly. So, so the budget is a projection, right? We're never going to hit these numbers exactly. The way that it goes from year to year is some things end up costing more than we thought, and some less. And if we're good at this, which I think Betsy and I have been for the last few years, we'll be able to get close. And thankfully in the last few years, as we budget for essentially a zero-sum budget, meaning trying to make income match expenses, we've been able to end the year with surplus the last few years. So that's been really good. It means we kind of were more conservative than we had needed to be, and that's where we want to be. So the budget doesn't really drive where income is recorded. What drives that is the existence of a donor restriction or not, and the existence of a chapter policy or not. So we have some policies, like on undesignated bequests, that they're automatically, added to the Cathedral Fund, the enduring funds, unless the chapter made a specific decision about something that came in, which is uncommon. But if something is indicated as pledge, it stays as part of the operating fund. Income is something it's operating fund, yeah.
Now, would you pay back the money you took from the enduring funds?
From the bequest, yeah, so from Cathedral Fund. Yeah, so if we don't, that actually is something that we do every year. After we've closed for December, we take a look at what money was actually not needed from special funds specifically, and if we can, we will return those funds, into those areas. So we'll have to see how it goes. And then what happens is, we make these projections as to where we're going to draw money from, and at the end of the year, if we're able to return money, we can make assessments at that time as to sort of which pot makes the most sense to replenish. Yeah, Justin.
Clarification on that. So when we say that we are borrowing from enduring funds and returning funds, are we actually pulling it physically out, or are we just using kind of a chapter approval to draw on it if necessary?
So Justin's question, because as Betsy mentioned this year, we budgeted for a extraordinary use of the Cathedral Fund of $200,000 is what chapter approved in order to balance the budget. This is extraordinary. We don't normally need to do that, and the way it will work in this case is that we had a number of bequests received in this last year. About $1 million of bequests were received in the past year, and so we actually pulled those funds and don't until the end of the year, and then we send, like, all of 2022 will get sent up to our investments in January of 2023, this month. So in this case, we just won't send it all, and what of that money is sitting in cash now will continue to sit in cash.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
I'd just like to have a chance to follow through and talk to your solar people, because I recognize that the main reason for it being up on the roof is that it's the access to sun. And so the question is, what other places give you the same access to the sun during various hours of the day? And that may be that I'm wrong in this case, that there is no other option, but I really would like to satisfy myself that they aren't just doing something because it's easier for them or more profitable. I don't know.
Well, so I'm going to speak for Kathleen a little bit. She can, whack me on the head if she needs to. She doesn't do that, just to be clear. But so the question again is about, where are we on solar, and having an opportunity really to satisfy the questions that have been posed here about what's going on. So I'm going to speak for Kathleen, and what I'm going to say is we needed another capital improvement project this past year or two, like we needed a hole in the head. This move into the new building was a substantial change and impacted the staff. Like, you know, maybe you wouldn't believe. And it's not that I don't think it has impacted all of you as well. In some ways we were, gosh, this is a terrible thing to say. The timing of the COVID shutdown ended up being sort of a blessing because we had this huge building going up, and it would have been, you know, very, very problematic for us to continue services and activities in our existing property. But as all of this changing is happening, solar, we didn't need to address solar.
And that building casts a shadow, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's true too. So, Justin, if you don't mind, just keeping, making a note, and I will make sure to talk to Kathleen about. It sounds like a solar-specific forum is maybe what's needed, or another communication in the e-news about where we are on the opportunities for solar or what the current thinking is.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure.
I apologize for bringing it up to me. It was simply new mandates with government that come up, and they want to do free. And I've been told by many people in the public throughout the county, throughout the state, and I'm around all the time. I'm wearing myself out. That when it's free and you can get it done and it doesn't cost the church, it doesn't cost the people, that's when to look into it. And I'm sorry I brought it up at the meeting, but I just wanted to let you know. One other thing that right now is very important and going to be in the city is gas stoves. They are considering removing all gas stoves from homes and churches and buildings because of continuous fires.
Yeah, so again, these are buildings and grounds questions.
So I was
They're not
letting you know
directly
that
accounting
these things have been on my mind, and I
Right.
apologize very much.
No, not at all. I think it's really important to know what the items are that there are still questions
They're busy.
about. So, so I will make sure to let Kathleen know that there needs to be some additional, well, Richard is hearing it too. So how to communicate to the community about what has been done and what the current thinking is of the leadership.
Yeah, the government, they're all the time.
Right.
They're busy trying to keep us safe, I know. You know, anyway, thank you for your consideration. I do apologize.
Absolutely. So Stacy's I'm getting the red light here and the like. So thank you all for your time today.
Thank you very much, Erin and Betsey. Next week at 9 o'clock, Dean Penny is going to give a tour of the music space. I'm not sure exactly where we will be meeting yet, but look for it in the e-bulletin on Thursday. And then next week, there will be the general meeting after worship in the Great Hall. Have a great Sunday, everyone.
And it's Chinese New Year's. Yay! I'm a Chinese person. Stacy, after 10:30.
Jen.
Yes.
Lunar New Year.
Okay, so the annual meeting.
After 10:30 worship is the annual meeting.
Thank you.